At my son's funeral, my daughter-in-law did not offer me a tissue or a shoulder to cry on. Instead, she leaned in close, her perfume clashing with the smell of wet earth, and gave me an eviction notice. 30 days to get out, old man, she whispered as the dirt hit the casket. I sold the house. She expected me to beg. She expected me to cry. But I just smiled, packed a bag, and walked away. She thought she had won. She thought she had thrown out a helpless pensioner. But the next morning, she wasn't waking up to a victory coffee. She was waking up to a SWAT team kicking down her door. Before I tell you how I destroyed her life in less than 24 hours, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. My name is Harry Bennett, and this is how I taught my daughter-in-law that you should never bite the hand that secretly feeds you. I am 71 years old, and standing there in the relentless Seattle rain, watching them lower Jason into the ground. I felt like my heart was being buried with him, my only son. Gone at 45. A sudden heart attack, the doctors had said. It didn't make sense. Jason was young, he didn't smoke, he didn't drink excessively. But grief has a way of clouding your logic, making you accept the unacceptable. I stood there, my black umbrella, doing little to stop the chill from seeping into my bones. Next to me stood Megan, my daughter-in-law of 15 years. She was dressed in impeccable black designer silk, looking more like she was attending a gala than burying her husband. She wasn't crying. Her eyes were dry, hidden behind large, dark sunglasses, scanning the crowd of mourners, not with sadness, but with calculation. Beside her was Leo, my 19-year-old grandson. He was the only one crying, his shoulders shaking, his face pale and devastated. I wanted to reach out to him, to hold the last piece of Jason I had left, but Megan stood between us like a wall of ice. The pastor finished his prayers. The few friends Jason had left drifted away, murmuring their condolences. I stood by the open grave, my hand resting on the cold brass rail of the lowering device. I just wanted a moment. One last moment to say goodbye to the boy I had raised on my own after my wife passed. I expected Megan to leave. I expected her to go back to the limousine and wait. Instead, she moved closer. She put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that looked comforting from a distance to anyone watching, but her grip was tight, almost painful. It was a claw, not a caress. "Harry, listen to me carefully," she whispered. Her voice was low, devoid of any emotion. "You need to stop this sad act. It is embarrassing. And while we are here, we need to clarify something. You have 30 days to get out of my house. Actually, looking at you now, I think 30 days is too generous. I want you gone tonight. I already spoke to a realtor. The house is sold." The words hung in the damp air, heavier than the rain. Sold it. That house was the home I had bought 20 years ago. I had put the deed in a family trust to protect it, but I let them live there rent-free so Jason could save money. I paid the property taxes. I paid the insurance. I paid for the new roof last year. But Megan didn't know that. To her, I was just a retired construction worker living on Social Security in the guest room, a burden she had tolerated only because Jason insisted. She thought Jason owned the house. She thought she had inherited a gold mine. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the greed etched into the lines around her mouth. I saw the contempt in her eyes. She thought she held all the cards. She thought I was weak, old, and destitute. She had no idea who I really was. She didn't know that before I retired, I wasn't just a construction worker. I was a developer who owned 3 commercial skyscrapers in downtown Seattle. She didn't know that my net worth was something she couldn't even count to. I had kept it a secret to ensure she loved Jason, for him, not for my money. A test she had failed every single day for 15 years. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't ask where I would go or how I would survive. I just smiled. It was a small, cold smile that I hadn't used since my days negotiating million-dollar commercial contracts in boardrooms filled with sharks much bigger than her. You know what, Megan, I said softly, my voice steady. You are right. 30 days is too long. I will leave right now. She blinked, surprised by my lack of resistance. She had prepared for a fight, for a scene she could use to play the victim. Good, she snapped, adjusting her sunglasses. Don't take anything that isn't yours. I'm changing the locks tomorrow. I turned my back on her stunned face. I walked past the rows of gray headstones toward the road, leaving my son's grave behind. I knew Jason would understand. He knew I loved him. But he also knew that I was a man who believed in consequences. I walked out of the cemetery gates and pulled out my phone. My old cracked smartphone that I used to keep up appearances. I didn't open the contacts to call a shelter. I didn't call a friend to ask for a couch to crash on. I opened the Uber app and selected the black option. 5 minutes later, a sleek black Cadillac Escalade pulled up to the curb, splashing a little mud on my worn-out trousers. The driver, a young man in a suit, stepped out and opened the door for me with deference. "Where to, sir?" he asked. "Take me to the Ritz-Carlton," I said. The driver nodded. As we drove away from the cemetery, leaving the rain and the misery behind a strange clarity washed over me. Grief is a heavy burden, crippling and dark. But anger is fuel. Anger is clarity. Megan had made a fatal mistake. She had mistaken my kindness for weakness. She had mistaken my silence for ignorance. When we arrived at the hotel, the doorman didn't look at my muddy shoes or my wet, cheap coat. He looked at my face. He had worked there for 20 years. He recognized me instantly. "Mr. Bennett, welcome back," he said, rushing to open the door. "We haven't seen you in a long time." "Hello, Michael," I said. "I need a room." "Of course, sir. The presidential suite is available. Shall I have them prepare it?" "Please. And Michael, I need you to send a bottle of Blue Label to the room, no ice." I walked into the lobby, the marble floors reflecting the chandeliers. It was a world away from the guest room I had been living in, sleeping on a lumpy mattress, while Megan complained about the cost of my groceries. I went up to the suite. It was larger than the entire house Megan had just kicked me out of. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the Seattle skyline, a skyline I had helped build. I went to the wet bar and poured a glass of scotch. My hands were finally steady. The image of Megan's smug face at the graveside burned in my mind. She wanted the house. She wanted the money she thought Jason had left. She wanted me gone. She was going to get one of those things, but not in the way she imagined. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out a second phone. It wasn't a smartphone. It was an encrypted satellite phone I kept for emergencies. This was an emergency. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 5 years. It rang once. "Henderson here," a gravelly voice answered. "It is Harry," I said. There was a pause on the other end. Then the tone shifted from professional to alert. "Harry, it has been a long time. I heard about Jason. I am sorry." "Thank you, Arthur," I said, taking a sip of the scotch. "But I am not calling for condolences. I am calling because I need to activate the Omega Protocol." I could hear the sound of a chair shifting on the other end. Arthur Henderson was the best lawyer in the state, a shark who ate other sharks for breakfast. He was also the only person who knew the full extent of my assets and the legal traps I had set up years ago, just in case. "Omega Protocol," Arthur asked. "That is the nuclear option, Harry. That freezes everything. It initiates the asset recovery. It triggers the audits. It authorizes the private investigators." "Are you sure?" I looked at my reflection in the glass. I looked old. I looked tired. But my eyes were hard. "I am sure," I said. "And Arthur, tell Miller, the investigator, to bring the toxicology report." "The toxicology report?" Arthur asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You suspect something. I suspected everything. Jason was healthy. He was strong. And Megan had been spending money she didn't have for years. I had seen the credit card bills she tried to hide. I had seen the way she looked at him with boredom and resentment. And then the rush to cremate him, which I had stopped at the last minute by claiming a religious objection. Yes, I said. I want to know exactly how my son died. And I want Megan destroyed. Not just financially. I want her to lose everything. I want her to lose the house she thinks is hers. I want her to lose her freedom. I want her to wake up tomorrow morning and realize she picked a fight with God. Consider it done, Arthur said. I will meet you at the hotel in 1 hour. I hung up the phone. The sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across the room. I wasn't Harry the helpless grandfather anymore. I wasn't the burden in the guest room. I was the man who owned the building she was trying to sell. I was the man who controlled every cent she thought she was inheriting. Megan wanted me out of her life. She wanted to erase me. Well, she was about to get her wish. I was gone. But what was coming for her was a storm she couldn't even imagine. I sat down in the leather armchair and waited. The game had just begun. The presidential suite at the Ritz-Carlton was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, a sound that felt like a countdown. I sat in a leather armchair that cost more than the car Megan drove, holding a glass of scotch that I hadn't touched since pouring it. I was still wearing my damp funeral suit, the mud from the cemetery drying on the cuffs of my trousers. It was a stark contrast to the opulence around me, the velvet drapes, the marble floors, the view of the city lights shimmering in the rain. But I didn't care about the luxury. I cared about the two men sitting across from me. Arthur Henderson, my lawyer for 30 years, looked older than I remembered, his silver hair thinning, but his eyes were as sharp as a hawk's. Beside him sat Detective Miller, a man who looked like he was carved out of granite, his face unreadable, his hands resting on a thick manila envelope. They were the only two people who knew the truth about Harold Bennett. To the world, and specifically to my daughter-in-law, I was a retired contractor living on a pension. But Arthur knew better. He was the one who had set up the blind trusts, the shell companies, the intricate web of legal structures that hid my ownership of 3 downtown skyscrapers and a portfolio of commercial real estate worth hundreds of millions. I had built this empire with calloused hands and sleepless nights, but I had hidden it to protect my son. I wanted Jason to build his own character, to find a woman who loved him, not the Bennett fortune. Arthur cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. Harry, we have reviewed the current situation. Legally, the house Megan just kicked you out of belongs to the Bennett Trust. You are the sole trustee. She has zero claim to it. The eviction notice she gave you is not worth the paper it is written on. In fact, by attempting to sell it, she has committed title fraud. We can have her removed for trespassing within the hour. I shook my head slowly. No, Arthur. Trespassing is a slap on the wrist. I don't want to inconvenience her. I want to end her. Miller leaned forward, then his movement heavy, deliberate. He pushed the manila envelope across the mahogany coffee table toward me. It slid with a soft hiss that sounded like a snake. Mr. Bennett Miller said, his voice gravelly and low. We managed to get the sample you asked for. The funeral director was very cooperative once Arthur explained the legal implications of a potential homicide investigation. We took hair samples from Jason before they closed the casket. My hand trembled as I reached for the envelope. I didn't want to open it. As long as it was closed, Jason had died of a heart attack. It was tragic, it was unfair, but it was natural. Opening that envelope meant facing a darkness I wasn't sure I could survive. But I thought of Megan's face at the graveside. The coldness. The calculation. I ripped the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a toxicology report. I scanned the lines, the medical jargon blurring until my eyes locked onto one compound highlighted in red. Ethylene glycol. I looked up at Miller, my voice barely a whisper. Antifreeze Miller nodded, his expression grim. It wasn't a heart attack, Harry. It was poisoning. And it wasn't a one-time dose. The analysis of the hair shaft shows a pattern. She has been dosing him for at least 6 months. Small amounts at first, probably in his coffee or his evening soup. Just enough to make him feel sick, lethargic, confused. It mimics kidney failure heart issues. It breaks down the body slowly. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I remembered Jason calling me 3 months ago, complaining about stomach cramps, saying he felt constantly tired. I told him to rest. I told him it was stress from work. I had told my son to sleep it off while his wife was feeding him poison. 6 months, I whispered. She watched him die for 6 months. She upped the dose 2 weeks ago. Miller continued, his voice devoid of pity, delivering only the cold, hard facts. That is what caused the cardiac arrest. It was a final massive dose. She got tired of waiting. I closed my eyes, a tear leaking out and tracing a path through the dirt on my cheek. I didn't just feel grief anymore. I felt a cold, white-hot rage that seemed to freeze the blood in my veins. This wasn't just greed. This was evil. Megan had looked into my son's eyes, the man who loved her, the father of her child, and she had killed him by inches. And for what? For a house she didn't own, for a life insurance policy that wouldn't even cover her debts. She thinks she won, Arthur said softly. She thinks you are a helpless old man wandering the streets tonight. She has no idea what is coming. Miller pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. He turned it around to face me. This is a live feed from the security system you had me install in the house last year, the one they don't know about. I looked at the screen. It was the living room of my home, the home I had bought. There was Megan. She wasn't mourning. She wasn't crying over photos of her dead husband. She was sitting on the sofa, her feet propped up on the coffee table, a glass of red wine in her hand. She was on the phone laughing. I could see her head thrown back, her teeth bared in a smile of pure triumph. She looked around the room with a possessive air, as if she were the queen of a castle she had just conquered. She had no idea that the walls were closing in. She had no idea that the man she had discarded was watching her from a penthouse suite, holding the evidence of her damnation. She is celebrating, I said, my voice flat. She is celebrating her own funeral, Arthur corrected. Harry, we can go to the police with the toxicology report right now. We can have her arrested for murder. No, I said, staring at the woman on the screen. Murder charges take time. They require grand juries. They require bail hearings where she might get out. I want her broken first. I want to strip her of her arrogance before I strip her of her freedom. What else do we have? Arthur pulled out a second document. It was thick, bound in blue legal paper. We did a forensic audit of Jason's finances as you asked. It is worse than we thought. Megan didn't just kill him. She bled him dry first. She forged his signature on 3 different loan applications. She took out credit cards in your name, Harry. She has been siphoning money from Jason's retirement account into a secret offshore account in the Caymans. We have the digital trail. We have the IP addresses. We have the forged signatures. This isn't just murder, Arthur said, tapping the document. This is wire fraud, identity theft, bank fraud, and elder abuse. These are federal crimes, and unlike the murder charge which she might try to fight with a sob story about assisted suicide or accidental ingestion, the paper trail doesn't lie. We can get a warrant for this tonight. I looked from the toxicology report to the fraud evidence. A plan formed in my mind. A plan that wouldn't just put her in jail, but would humiliate her in front of the entire neighborhood she was so desperate to impress. I don't want the homicide detectives there yet, I said. If they arrest her for murder, she becomes a victim, a tragedy. People will wonder if she snapped. I want her arrested for greed. I want her arrested for being a thief. The murder charge will be the nail in the coffin later. Tomorrow morning, I want the police at that door. Not for Jason. For the money. Arthur nodded, a shark sensing blood in the water. I can have a judge sign an emergency warrant for financial fraud, and elder exploitation within the hour. We have enough probable cause to raid the house and seize all electronic devices." "Do it," I said. Arthur slid a paper across the desk. It was the authorization for the police action. It granted them permission to enter the property owned by the Bennett Trust. It was the key to her destruction. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. My hand didn't shake this time. I looked at Megan one last time on the screen. She was pouring another glass of wine, oblivious to the sword hanging over her neck. She thought she had 30 days. She didn't even have 12 hours. I signed my name at the bottom of the page. Harold Bennett. "Execute it," I said, handing the paper back to Arthur. "Tell them to be there at 6 a.m. I want the neighbors to see. I want her to walk out in handcuffs while the coffee is still brewing." Arthur stood up, buttoning his jacket. "It will be done. Try to get some sleep, Harry. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." They left the suite, leaving me alone with the ticking clock and the ghost of my son. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the city, waiting for the sun to rise, waiting for the moment when Megan's world would shatter into a million pieces. She had told me to pack my bags. Well, I hoped she had packed hers, because where she was going, they didn't allow designer luggage. 6 a.m. is a cruel time to wake up, especially when you went to bed thinking you owned the world. The sun was just beginning to bleed over the horizon, painting the suburban streets of Bellevue in a soft, deceptive pink light. It was the kind of morning designed for coffee on the porch and the newspaper. But for my daughter-in-law, it was the morning the sky fell down. I sat in the back of a black Lincoln town car parked 3 houses down, the tinted windows rolling up just enough to obscure my face while giving me a front-row seat to the show I had orchestrated. I held a steaming cup of black coffee in my hand, the heat seeping through the paper cup, grounding me. Beside me, Arthur Henderson checked his watch. "It is time," he said simply. As if on cue, the silence of the cul-de-sac was shattered not by sirens, but by the heavy rhythmic thud of boots on pavement. They didn't come with flashing lights. They came with the terrifying efficiency of a predator. 3 unmarked SUVs and a tactical van swerved around the corner, boxing in the driveway where Megan's leased Mercedes sat like a trophy. Officers in tactical gear spilled out of the van. These weren't your friendly neighborhood beat cops. This was the Economic Crimes Unit, backed by a SWAT entry team. They moved with a speed that made my heart race, even though I was the one who had sent them. They didn't ring the doorbell. They didn't knock politely. They used a battering ram. The sound of my front door splintering the door I had paid for, the door I had painted myself 10 years ago, echoed down the street like a gunshot. "Police search warrant." The shout was a collective roar that seemed to shake the leaves off the trees. Lights flicked on in the neighboring houses. Curtains twitched. Mrs. Gable, the neighborhood gossip who lived directly across the street, stepped onto her porch in her bathrobe, clutching her chest. This was exactly what I wanted. Megan cared more about her reputation than her soul. I was about to strip her of both. For a moment, there was only the sound of shouting from inside the house. "Move hands, where I can see them, clear left, clear right." Then the procession began. Megan was the first to emerge, and she looked nothing like the composed, arrogant woman who had hissed at me in the cemetery yesterday. She was wearing cream-colored silk pajamas that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her hair was a bird's nest of tangles. Her face was devoid of makeup, pale and twisted in a rictus of shock and fury. Her hands were cuffed behind her back. "Let go of me!" she screamed, thrashing against the grip of a female officer who looked like she could bench press a truck. "You can't do this. This is my house. Do you know who I am?" The officer didn't even blink. She marched Megan down the driveway, past the perfectly manicured lawn, and shoved her toward one of the SUVs. Megan dug her bare heels into the pavement, fighting for purchase, fighting for dignity she didn't possess. She scanned the gathering crowd of neighbors, her eyes wild. "Call the police," she shrieked at Mrs. Gable. "These people are breaking into my home. They are hurting me." Ma'am, we are the police, a detective in a cheap suit said, stepping into her line of sight. He held up a document that fluttered in the morning breeze. And this is not your home. Megan stopped thrashing for a second, confusion warring with her rage. What are you talking about? My husband died yesterday. I inherited this house. I am the owner. The detective shook his head, his expression bored. He had seen 1,000 grifters like her. He didn't care about her story. He cared about the paperwork. According to the property records and the seizure order issued by the court at 2 a.m. this morning, this property belongs to the Bennett Family Trust. You are being evicted for criminal breach of contract trespassing, and we are executing a federal warrant for wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. Megan froze. The words hit her like physical blows. Elder abuse. Fraud. Trust. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook. Elder abuse, that old man. He's a pauper. He doesn't have a trust. He doesn't have anything. The detective just smiled, a thin, humorless curling of his lips. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it. He pushed her head down and guided her into the back of the SUV. The door slammed shut with a finality that resonated in my bones. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted bitter, but it was the best cup I had ever had. Seeing her in handcuffs, seeing her realize that her narrative was crumbling should have been enough. But the knife hadn't been twisted fully yet. The front door opened again. This time it wasn't a prisoner being dragged out. It was Leo. My grandson stumbled onto the porch, blinking against the morning light. He was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking terrified and small. He wasn't in handcuffs, thank God. I had made sure the warrant specified that he was not a target, that he was a potential witness. He looked at the police swarming the house, boxing up computers, taking photos of the furniture. He looked at the SUV where his mother was screaming behind the glass. He looked at the neighbors staring and whispering. Leo, Megan screamed from inside the car, her voice muffled but audible. Leo, call a lawyer, call your grandfather, tell him to fix this. Leo didn't move toward the car. He didn't run to his mother. He stood frozen on the steps of the house he had grown up in, a house that was now a crime scene. Then he slowly lifted his head. He scanned the street. He looked past the police cars, past Mrs. Gable, past the chaos. His eyes locked onto the black limousine parked in the shadows down the block. He couldn't see me through the tint. He couldn't know for sure that I was inside. But he knew. I saw the realization dawn on his face. He knew that his father hadn't left him this mess. He knew his mother was a liar. And he knew who held the power. He didn't look at his mother again. He looked straight at my car, and for a fleeting second, his expression wasn't anger. It wasn't betrayal. It was a desperate, pleading terror. It was the look of a boy realizing he was alone in a tank full of sharks, and the only person with a lifeline was the grandfather he had watched get kicked to the curb less than 24 hours ago. Drive, I told the chauffeur. The engine purred to life. As we pulled away, sliding past the scene of my family's destruction, I didn't look back at Megan. I looked at Leo. I saw him reach into his pocket and pull out his phone. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I ignored it. Let him sweat. Let him wonder. He needed to understand that the Bennett family safety net had been ripped away. If he wanted to survive what was coming, he would have to choose a side. And for the first time in his life, the choice wouldn't be easy. We turned the corner and the house disappeared from view. The first battle was won. Megan was in custody. The assets were frozen. But the war was far from over. She would get bail. She would fight. She was a cornered rat, and rats bite. But she didn't know that I had just taken away her teeth. I sat back in the leather seat, the adrenaline fading into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't Harry the victim anymore. I was the executioner. And the next time I shot my daughter-in-law, she wouldn't be looking down at me. She would be looking up from the defendant's table. 24 hours in a county holding cell does not humble a narcissist. It only distills their rage into a potent, volatile poison. I expected Megan to come out broken, perhaps a little more cautious, but as I watched the security feed from the comfort of my limousine parked down the street, I saw that a knight sleeping on a concrete bench had only stripped away her mask of civility. She looked feral. Her lawyer, a man named Silas, who wore suits that cost less than my socks and smelled of desperate ambition, had managed to exploit a loophole in the filing procedure. White-collar crime. First offense, low flight risk, he had argued it all to a judge who was too tired to care. She was out on bail, but bail cost money, and Megan didn't have any. That meant she had borrowed it. And looking at the black sedan that dropped her off a car with tinted windows and no license plates, I knew she hadn't borrowed it from a bank. She had gone to the sharks. She was desperate, and desperation makes people stupid. She marched up the driveway of the house she still delusionally thought was hers. She was still wearing the cream silk pajamas she had been arrested in, now stained with the grime of the precinct, and wrinkled from a night of pacing. She didn't look at the neighbors who were peeking through their blinds. She looked only at the front door. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her key, and jammed it into the lock. It didn't turn. I signaled my driver to move the car forward. I wanted a front row seat for this. Megan twisted the key violently. She jiggled the handle. Then she stepped back and looked at the door. It wasn't the same door she had been dragged out of yesterday. The brass hardware was gone, replaced by a sleek, matte black panel with a blue glowing ring. A biometric scanner. I had my contractors install it 2 hours after the police tape came down. She screamed. It was a primal, frustrated sound that echoed through the quiet cul-de-sac. She kicked the door, her bare foot making a dull thud against the reinforced wood. "Open this door," she shrieked. "I live here. This is my house." I opened the car door and stepped out. The morning air was crisp, a stark contrast to the heat of her fury. I wasn't alone. Flanking me were 2 men, former military contractors who now ran my private security detail. They didn't look like mall cops. They looked like walls of muscle in bespoke suits. I cleared my throat. "The lock requires a fingerprint, Megan," I said calmly, my voice carrying easily across the lawn. "And specifically, a fingerprint attached to a person who isn't currently under federal investigation for fraud." She spun around. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair a matted mess, but her glare was pure hatred. She saw me, she saw the bodyguards, and she didn't flinch. She smiled. It was a terrifying, unhinged expression. "You old fool," she spat, walking down the steps toward me. "You think changing the lock saves you? You think your little stunt with the police matters? You played your hand too early, Harry." She reached into her pajama pocket and pulled out a folded, crumpled document. She waved it in the air like a sword. "My lawyer found this in Jason's safe deposit box this morning," she sneered. "You said the house is in a trust. You said you own it. Well, guess what? Jason left a will. A holographic will, handwritten, dated 3 months ago. And in it, he explicitly states that the house was gifted to him by you 5 years ago, and he leaves everything to his wife." She thrust the paper toward me. "Read it," she screamed. "It has your signature on the transfer deed attached to the back. You signed the house over to him, Harry. You forgot, didn't you? You're senile. You signed it over, and now it's mine. The police can't touch me. This is a civil matter now, and I have the title." I didn't reach for the paper. I just looked at it from a distance. I could see the signature at the bottom. It was a good forgery. It looked exactly like my signature. She had clearly spent hours practicing it, probably tracing it from old birthday cards I had sent Jason. It was a bold move. If the document was real, the police raid was illegal. If the document was real, she owned the house. If the document was real, I was the one who was going to jail for filing a false police report. But Megan was not a smart criminal. She was just a greedy one. I took a step closer, my bodyguards tensing, ready to intercept. I peered at the document. "Let me see that date," I said softly. "March 15th, she gloated. "March 15th of this year. See, notarized and everything. I have a witness." I started to laugh. It wasn't a joyful laugh. It was a dry, rattling sound that made her smile falter. "March 15th, I repeated. "That is a very interesting date, Megan. Because on March 15th, I was not in Seattle. I wasn't even in the United States." Her eyes flickered. "On March 15th, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I was in a hospital bed in Munich, Germany, undergoing emergency triple bypass surgery. I was in a medically induced coma for 3 days. I pulled my passport from my jacket pocket and flipped it open to the visa pages. I held it up for her to see. Here is the entry stamp. March 10th. Here is the exit stamp. April 2nd. Unless I learned how to astral project and sign legal documents while my chest was cracked open on an operating table, that signature is a fake. And not just a fake, Megan. It is a stupid fake." The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. She looked at the paper in her hand, then back at me. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't checked. She had just picked a random date, assuming I was sitting in my guest room rotting away. She had forged a document that proved her guilt more effectively than any wiretap ever could. "You are lying," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am not the one holding a forged federal document," I said. "You just handed me the evidence to put you away for 20 years. Attempted fraud, forgery, perjury. Do you want to keep going?" The paper shook in her hand. She looked at the house, the symbol of the status she craved, the prize she had killed for. Then she looked at me, the man who had taken it all away. The snap was audible. I saw it happen in her eyes. The logic centers of her brain shut down, overridden by pure animalistic rage. She didn't care about the bodyguards. She didn't care about the law. She just wanted to hurt me. "You ruin everything." She screamed a guttural banshee wail. She crumpled the paper and lunged. She covered the distance between us in a second, her fingernails aimed at my eyes, her teeth bared. I didn't move. I didn't have to. Before she could get within 3 feet of me, the bodyguard on my right moved with the speed of a striking cobra. He didn't hit her. He simply stepped into her path, grabbed her outstretched arm, and used her own momentum against her. With a fluid motion, he spun her around and slammed her face first onto the pavement. Megan hit the ground hard. The air left her lungs in a wheezing gasp. She tried to scramble up, but the bodyguard placed a knee gently but firmly in the center of her back, pinning her to the concrete. "Get off me," she wheezed, spitting grit. I walked over and stood above her. I looked down at the woman who had poisoned my son. "You know, Megan," I said, adjusting my cuffs, "I was willing to let the financial crimes play out. But you just made a tactical error." She looked up at me from the ground, one eye already swelling shut from the impact. "Attacking a person over the age of 65 is a special class of felony in this state," I said coldly. "It is called assault on an elderly person. It carries a mandatory minimum sentence. And since you are currently out on bail, well, I think your bail just got revoked." I looked at the bodyguard. "Call the police. Tell them we have a trespasser who just attempted to assault the homeowner. And make sure you give them the video footage from your body cam." Megan stopped struggling. She lay there on the cold driveway, the forged will crumpled under her hand, defeated not by force but by her own incompetence. I turned my back on her and walked toward the house. I had to sanitize it. I had to erase her presence before I could even think about grieving. But as I reached for the biometric scanner, I felt no joy. Only the grim satisfaction of a job half done. She was going back to jail, but the war wasn't over. She still had one card left to play, the one card that could still hurt me. Leo. The boy looked like a ghost standing in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton. Leo was 19 years old, a college sophomore with the world on his shoulders, but in that moment he looked like a lost child. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hoodie was pulled up as if to hide from the world, and his hands were shaking violently at his sides. He wasn't just grieving, he was being torn apart from the inside out. I knew why. Even from a jail cell, Megan had claws that could reach deep. She had used her one phone call not to contact a lawyer, but to poison her son. I walked across the marble floor to meet him. I didn't reach out to hug him. I knew he wouldn't accept it. The way he looked at me with a mixture of fear and betrayal told me exactly what his mother had whispered into his ear. She had told him I was the villain. She had told him I was a greedy old man who had snapped, who had killed his father for insurance money, and who was now framing her to take the house. It was a desperate, illogical lie, but to a boy who had just lost his father, desperation sounds a lot like truth. Grandpa Leo said, his voice cracking. Mom says you did it. She says you switched Dad's pills. She says you paid the police to plant evidence. Is it true? Tell me it isn't true. People in the lobby were starting to stare. I saw the concierge reach for the phone, probably to call security, but I waved him off. This was a family matter. It had to be settled in blood, not by bouncers. I didn't answer him. I didn't offer a defense. Words are cheap, and Megan was better at using them than I ever would be. I needed something stronger than words. Come with me, Leo, I said gently. He took a step back. No. I'm not going anywhere with you until you answer me. Did you hurt him when I looked him dead in the eye? I looked at the chin that was just like Jason's, the eyes that held the same kindness my son had possessed before Megan crushed it out of him. I am going to show you the truth, I said, but you have to be brave enough to look at it. Your mother talks. I deal in facts. If you want to know who killed your father, get in the car. He hesitated. For a long moment I thought he would run. I thought Megan's conditioning would be too strong. But then curiosity, or perhaps the faint memory of the grandfather who used to teach him how to fish, won out. He followed me to the waiting car. We didn't speak during the drive. The silence was heavy, suffocating. We drove out of the city past the suburbs to an industrial park near the airport. It was a row of nondescript climate-controlled storage units. This was my safe house. Not a bunker, but a vault where I kept the things that actually mattered. I punched in the code, and the heavy steel door rolled up. Inside, it wasn't filled with old furniture or boxes of junk. It was an office. A command center I had set up years ago when I first suspected Megan was stealing. There were file cabinets, a secure server, and a desk. On the desk sat a single object, a watch. It was a heavy stainless steel diver's watch. It was scratched and worn. Jason had worn it every day for 10 years. It was the one thing he never took off. Megan hated it. She said it was cheap and ugly. She didn't know I had given it to him, and she certainly didn't know what I had done to it 6 months ago, when Jason first came to me complaining about his stomach pains. Leo walked into the room looking around nervously. He saw the watch and stopped. He let out a choked sob. That's Dad's. Yes, I said. I picked it up. It felt heavy in my hand, the weight of a life. I handed it to him. Leo took it, running his thumb over the cracked crystal. Why do you have this? The coroner gave us his personal effects. Mom said she lost it. She didn't lose it, I said. I took it from the hospital morgue before she could get her hands on it. Because she knew what it was. Or at least she suspected. I reached into the drawer and pulled out a small specialized tool. I took the watch back from Leo and unscrewed the case back. It wasn't a battery inside. It was a micro SD card slot hidden beneath the movement mechanism. I used tweezers to pull out a tiny memory card. Jason came to me 6 months ago. I told Leo, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. He was sick. He was scared. He didn't know why he was getting worse. He wouldn't leave her because of you, Leo. He was afraid she would take you away and he would never see you again. So I gave him this. It is a recording device, voice activated, high fidelity. I inserted the card into the computer on the desk. I turned the monitor so Leo could see. There were hundreds of files. I clicked on the one dated 3 weeks ago. The day before Jason died. Watch, I said. The video was grainy shot from a low angle, likely from Jason's wrist as he lay in bed. The room was dim. You could hear the labored breathing of a man drowning in his own fluids. Then the camera shifted. It showed Jason's face. Leo gasped. His father looked like a skeleton. His skin was gray, his eyes sunken and terrified. He looked directly into the camera lens. Dad. Jason's voice whispered from the speakers. It was raspy wet. If you are seeing this, it means I didn't make it. Leo put his hand over his mouth, tears streaming down his face. I can't breathe. Jason continued on the screen. She just brought me soup. Chicken noodle. My favorite. But it tastes sweet. It tastes like metal and syrup. She stood there and watched me eat it. She wouldn't leave until I finished the bowl. She was smiling, Dad. She was smiling while I was choking. The video shook as Jason coughed a violent racking sound that made Leo flinch. I think she put something in it, Jason gasped. I think she's been doing it for a long time. I found a bottle in the garage. Antifreeze. But the car is electric, Dad. We don't use antifreeze. Jason closed his eyes, exhaustion taking over. Save Leo, he whispered. Don't let her take him. She talks about the insurance money when she thinks I'm asleep. She talks about moving to Europe. She hates him, Dad. She calls him a burden. Please, get him out. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the storage unit was absolute. It was broken only by the sound of Leo's breathing. It started slow, then jagged, then turned into a wail of pure, unadulterated agony. He collapsed onto the floor, curling into a ball, clutching his stomach as if he were the one who had been poisoned. No, he screamed. No, 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 not Mom, not her. I got down on my knees beside him. I didn't say anything. I just put my hand on his back and let him scream. He needed to break. He needed to shatter so we could rebuild him. He cried for his father. He cried for the mother he thought he had. He cried for the lie his life had been. After 10 minutes, the sobbing stopped. He sat up, wiping his face with his sleeve. His eyes were different now. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. In their place was something cold and hard. It was the Bennett steel. She killed him, he whispered. She actually killed him. Yes, I said, and she tried to kill me yesterday. And if we don't stop her, she will destroy you too. She doesn't love you, Leo. You are just a prop to her. You are just leverage. Leo stood up. He looked at the computer screen one last time, then he looked at me. He looked older. The boy was gone. She came into my room last night, Leo said, his voice devoid of emotion, before the police came. She was looking for something. She was tearing the place apart. She told me she was looking for her passport, but she wasn't looking in the drawers. She was looking under the floorboards. I stiffened. What was she looking for? Leo reached into his back pocket. He pulled out a small black moleskin notebook. It was old, the leather worn. She didn't find it, Leo said, because I moved it a week ago. I saw her hiding it there one night when she thought I was asleep. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was a diary. I thought maybe she was having an affair, and I didn't want to know. So I took it and hid it in my gym locker at school. I just got it back. He handed me the book. I think this is what you need, Grandpa. I opened the book. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. My hands shook as I turned the pages. It was a meticulous record of every crime she had committed, every forged check, every stolen credit card number, every dose of poison. Date October 4th. Dose 10. Reaction, vomiting, confusion. Note, increased dose next week. Date November 12th. Transfer $5,000 from Jason's IRA. Status successful. He didn't notice. Date January 3rd. Note, the old man is asking questions. Need to accelerate timeline. She had written it all down. Her arrogance was so absolute that she felt the need to document her own brilliance. She treated murder like a science experiment and theft like a business transaction. This wasn't just evidence. This was a confession written in her own handwriting. This was the nail in her coffin, the dirt on her grave, and the lock on her cell door, all in one. I looked at Leo. He had just handed me the weapon that would send his mother to prison for the rest of her life. You know what this means, Leo? I asked softly. If we give this to the police, she is never coming out. Leo looked at me. His eyes were dry now. She watched him eat the soup, he said, his voice trembling with rage. She smiled. He took a deep breath and squared his shoulders. Let's go, Grandpa. I want to be the one who hands it to the detective. I put a hand on his shoulder. I had lost a son, but in the darkness of that storage unit, I realized I hadn't lost everything. I still had a grandson. And together, we were going to bring down the devil herself. We walked out into the sunlight, the black book safe in my jacket pocket. Megan thought she was fighting a lonely old man. She didn't know she was now fighting a war on two fronts, and she had just lost her most valuable hostage. I sat in the back of the family court hearing room watching Megan perform. She was good, I had to give her that. She had traded her silk pajamas for a modest black dress that was just tight enough to suggest vulnerability and just expensive enough to suggest status. She had scrubbed the makeup off her face to look pale and exhausted. To the judge, a weary woman named Eleanor Vance, who looked like she had seen too many family squabbles, Megan looked like a grieving widow being bullied by a vindictive father-in-law. Her lawyer Silas was pacing in front of the bench, waving his arms like a conductor of a tragic orchestra. Your Honor, this is a clear case of financial abuse, he droned, his voice dripping with righteous indignation. My client has just lost her husband. She is traumatized. And instead of support, her father-in-law has locked her out of her marital home, frozen her bank accounts, and left her destitute. We are filing an emergency motion for immediate access to Jason Bennett's estate and a temporary restraining order against Harold Bennett. We are asking for $5,000 a month in spousal support from the estate until probate is settled. Megan dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue, sniffing loudly for effect. I just want to grieve, she whispered loud enough for the court reporter to catch. I just want to go home. I looked at Arthur Henderson beside me. He wasn't taking notes. He wasn't preparing a rebuttal. He was checking the stock market on his phone. He looked bored. That was the thing about Arthur. He didn't get excited unless there was a challenge. And Megan wasn't a challenge. She was a clerical error he was about to correct. Mr. Henderson. Judge Vance asked, peering over her spectacles. Do you have a response? Arthur stood up slowly. He didn't walk to the podium. He just buttoned his jacket and addressed the judge from his table. Your Honor, we oppose the motion on the grounds that there is no estate to access. Megan's head snapped up. What she hissed. Jason Bennett died with exactly $400 in his personal checking account. Arthur continued calmly. He had no savings. He had no investments. He had no property. Liar, Megan screamed, forgetting her role as the weeping widow. We lived like royalty. We spent $10,000 a month. We went to Europe. We drove Porsches. Where did the money go? You stole it. Judge Vance banged her gavel. Order Mrs. Bennett, control yourself. Mr. Henderson, explain. If the deceased had no money, how were they maintaining this lifestyle? Arthur turned to look at Megan. He smiled, a predatory baring of teeth. Excellent question, Your Honor. Mrs. Bennett believes she was spending her husband's salary. She believes Jason was a successful consultant. The truth is, Jason hasn't held a steady job in 10 years. The courtroom went silent. Megan looked like she had been slapped. Then who paid for everything? Silas stuttered. My client did, Arthur said, gesturing to me. For the past decade, Harold Bennett has been subsidizing his son's life to keep him from bankruptcy. He paid the rent, he paid the car leases, and most importantly, he paid the credit card bills. Arthur picked up a thick stack of financial records and dropped them onto the plaintiff's table with a heavy thud. These are the statements for the American Express Platinum and the Visa Infinite cards Mrs. Bennett carries in her purse, Arthur said. She believes they are primary accounts in Jason's name. They are not. They are supplementary cards issued under the corporate account of Bennett Holdings. My client Harold Bennett is the primary account holder. He has paid every single bill, every spa day, every designer handbag, every grocery run for 10 years. Megan grabbed the papers. Her hands shook as she read the headers. Primary account holder, Harold Bennett. She flipped the pages. Payment received from Harold Bennett. She looked at me, her eyes wide with horror. She realized in that moment that she hadn't been a trophy wife to a successful man. She had been a leech feeding off a host she despised. So Arthur concluded, since there is no marital asset to freeze and since the credit cards belong solely to my client, he is exercising his right to close them. I pulled out my phone. I had the banking app open. I looked Megan in the eye across the courtroom. I wanted her to see me do it. I wanted her to know that her lifestyle wasn't being taken by a judge or a bank error. It was being taken by me. I tapped the screen. Cancel card ending in 4098. Confirm. Cancel card ending in 2210. Confirm. Your phone is about to buzz, Megan, I said softly. A second later, her phone lit up on the table. A notification from American Express. Account closed. Then another. Visa alert card deactivated. Her financial lifeline was severed in real time. She wasn't just broke. She was negative. She had zero access to cash. Zero access to credit. She was a pauper in designer clothes. This is illegal, Silas shouted, though he sounded unsure. You can't just cut her off. It is his money, the judge said, looking at the documents with raised eyebrows. He is not her husband. He has no obligation to support her. Motion denied. Mrs. Bennett. Suggest you find a job. Case dismissed. The gavel banged. It sounded like the closing of a coffin lid. Megan stood up, trembling with rage. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the courtroom, her heels clicking angrily on the floor. She didn't look at me. She just wanted to get away. She wanted to get into her safe space, her sanctuary, her Porsche. I watched her go, then turned to Arthur. Shall we? We walked out of the courthouse at a leisurely pace. We didn't need to run. The trap was already sprung. We stepped out onto the courthouse steps just in time to see Megan reach the curb. Her white Porsche Cayenne was parked in the loading zone, hazard lights blinking. It was the symbol of her status. The one thing she thought she still owned. But she wasn't the only one at the car. A tow truck was backed up to the bumper. A police officer was writing a ticket. And a man in a jumpsuit was hooking chains to the undercarriage. Hey! Megan screamed, running down the steps. Get away from my car! What are you doing? The police officer looked up. Are you Megan Bennett? Yes, and that is my car. Unhook it right now. The officer shook his head. Ma'am, this vehicle has been reported stolen. Stolen, she shrieked. I have the keys, look. She waved the fob in his face. Possession of keys does not equal ownership, the officer said boredly. The registered owner, Bennett Commercial Properties, reported unauthorized use of a company vehicle. They requested immediate repossession. Megan froze. She looked at the car. She looked at the tow truck driver who was already lifting the rear wheels off the ground. Bennett Commercial Properties, she whispered. She turned around. She saw me standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at her. You, she mouthed. I nodded. Me. Jason didn't own the car, Megan, I called out. It was a company lease. And you are not an employee. You are just a thief who took the keys. She tried to lunge for the door handle, but the officer blocked her path. Ma'am, step back, or I will arrest you for obstruction. You need to empty your personal belongings. Now. She scrambled to open the door. She grabbed her sunglasses, a tube of lipstick, and a half-empty water bottle. That was it. That was her net worth. The tow truck engine roared. The Porsche, her pride and joy, was hoisted into the air. She watched it go, her face crumbling. She looked around. She was standing on the side of a busy highway in downtown Seattle. She had no car. She had no credit cards. She had no cash. She couldn't even call an Uber because the card linked to her app was dead. She was stranded. She looked up at me one last time, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and terror. She realized then that she wasn't fighting a battle for assets. She was fighting for survival. I turned to Arthur. I'm hungry. Let's get lunch. We walked away, leaving her standing in the exhaust fumes of the traffic, holding a lipstick and a water bottle, realizing that for the first time in her life she was going to have to walk. Desperation has a smell. It smells like stale cigarette smoke, cheap motel soap, and fear sweat. I imagined that was exactly what Megan smelled like as she paced the floor of the roadside motel room she had retreated to after losing her car. My private investigator, Miller, had tapped into the motel's security feed illegally, perhaps, but I wasn't concerned with the finer points of privacy law when dealing with a murderer. I watched her on my tablet from the comfort of the Ritz. She was unraveling. Her movements were jerky, frantic. She was on the phone with Silas, her lawyer, and even without audio I could tell he was demanding a retainer she didn't have. She hung up and threw the phone onto the bed. She dug through her purse, pulling out a bottle of Xanax. She shook it. It was empty. She needed money, fast, and she had burned every bridge she had. I knew exactly where her mind would go next. It wouldn't go to a job application. It wouldn't go to a pawn shop she had nothing left to pawn. It would go to the one asset she knew existed, but hadn't been able to touch yet. My wife's diamonds. Sarah, God rest her soul, had a collection of vintage jewelry that was the envy of the country club, set back when we were building our life. There was a 3-carat solitaire ring, a diamond tennis bracelet, and a sapphire necklace surrounded by diamonds that I had bought her for our 30th anniversary. Megan had coveted them for years. She used to ask to try them on, her eyes glittering with a hunger that unsettled me even then. When Sarah died, I put them in a safe deposit box at First National. Megan knew about the box. She just didn't have the key, or at least she didn't think she did. I turned to Leo, who was sitting at the desk in the hotel suite, trying to study for a calculus exam, despite the hurricane destroying his family. Leo, I said, I need you to send a text message. He looked up, tired but alert. To who? To your dad's old phone, I said. Megan still has it. She took it from the hospital. She thinks I don't know. Send a text saying, Grandpa, I'm worried about the safety deposit box key. You left it in the top drawer of Dad's desk in the study. Should I go get it? Leo hesitated. You want her to break in, I want her to hang herself, I corrected. And to do that, she needs a rope. Leo typed the message. His thumbs hovered over the screen for a second, a moment of hesitation for the mother he was betraying. Then he remembered the video of his dying father. He hit send. The bait was in the water. Now we just had to wait for the shark. I didn't have to wait long. Miller called me at 2 a.m. She is on the move, he said. She took a cab to the edge of the neighborhood and is walking the rest of the way. I switched the feed on my tablet to the security cameras inside the house. The house was dark, silent. It looked like a tomb. I had specifically instructed the security team not to change the lock on the back patio door. Megan had hidden a spare key inside a fake rock in the garden 3 years ago. She thought she was being clever, keeping a secret way in. I had known about it for 2 years and 11 months. I had left it there for exactly this moment. On the screen, a shadow moved across the backyard. It was Megan. She was wearing a dark hoodie and gloves, trying to look like a professional cat burglar, but looking more like a nervous teenager. She went straight to the rock. She found the key. I saw her shoulders sag with relief. She thought she had found a loophole in my fortress. She slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. She slipped inside. I watched her move through the kitchen, the infrared cameras turning her into a ghostly pale figure. She didn't turn on the lights. She used the flashlight on her phone, the beam cutting through the darkness. She moved quickly, not caring about noise. She thought the house was empty. She thought she was the only predator in the jungle. She went straight to the study. It was the room where Jason used to hide from her, where he used to pretend to work just to get a moment of peace. She didn't care about the memories. She cared about the desk. She reached the heavy oak desk and yanked open the top drawer. She rummaged through papers, old pens, and paper clips. She was frantic, tossing things onto the floor. Then she stopped. Her hand emerged from the drawer holding a small silver key. It was an old-fashioned safe deposit box key, engraved with the bank's logo and a number 404. It was a prop. I had swapped the real key years ago. This key opened a box, yes, but not the one she thought. I zoomed in on the camera feed. The beam of her flashlight illuminated her face. For the first time in days, she wasn't scowling. She wasn't crying. She was smiling. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. It was the smile of a woman who thought she had just found a winning lottery ticket in the gutter. She clutched the key to her chest, closing her eyes as if saying a prayer to the god of greed. "Got you, you old bastard," I imagined her whispering. She put the key in her pocket and turned to leave. She moved with a new confidence now. She had the means to save herself. She had the means to hire a lawyer who could fight me. She had the means to run if she needed to. She slipped out the back door, locking it behind her, careful to leave no trace. She disappeared into the night, heading back to her motel, back to her plotting. I set the tablet down on the table. The trap wasn't just set, it was sprung. She had the bait in her mouth, and she was swimming hard, thinking she was free. She didn't feel the hook yet. She wouldn't feel it until she walked into the bank tomorrow morning. I looked at the time. 2:45 a.m. "Go to sleep, Leo," I said. "We have an early start." Leo looked at the blank screen. "What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," I said, pouring the last of the lukewarm coffee down the sink. "Your mother learns that the only thing worse than finding an empty vault is finding a vault that speaks." I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there visualizing the bank lobby. I visualized the look on her face. I visualized the handcuffs. It was going to be a masterpiece. Megan wanted the diamonds. She was going to get steel bracelets instead. And the best part? She had done it all to herself. Every step, every choice, every crime was her own. I had just left the door unlocked. The First National Bank downtown is a cathedral of silence and marble, a place where money whispers rather than shouts. I watched the security feed from the manager's office, sitting comfortably with a cup of tea while Megan walked into the lobby like she owned the building. She had tried to clean herself up after her night in jail and her brawl on the driveway. She was wearing a trench coat and large sunglasses, trying to project the image of a wealthy widow handling her affairs, but I could see the tremor in her hands. She was running on adrenaline and panic, a dangerous fuel that burns hot and fast before it leaves you stranded. She approached the front desk with the imperious attitude she reserved for service workers. "I want to access my husband's safe deposit box," she told the teller, sliding a sheaf of papers across the counter. "These are the death certificate and his authorization adding me to the account." The documents were fake, of course. Another rush job by her forger friend before he got arrested, or maybe just bad Photoshop on her part. It didn't matter. I had instructed the bank manager, an old friend named Robert, to let her through. If she wanted to dig her grave, we were going to hand her the shovel. "Of course, Mrs. Bennett," the teller said, barely glancing at the paperwork. "I am so sorry for your loss. If you have the key, I can escort you to the vault immediately." I saw Megan's shoulders sag with relief. She thought she had bypassed the system. She patted her pocket where the silver key rested, the key she had stolen from my house in the dead of night, breaking a restraining order and committing felony burglary in the process. She didn't know that key was the final nail in her coffin. She followed the teller through the heavy steel gates and down the stairs into the belly of the bank. The vault was a room of floor-to-ceiling stainless steel boxes, cold and imposing. The air smelled of dust and old paper. It was quiet, a tomb for secrets. "Box 404. The teller said, pointing to a drawer at eye level. "I will give you some privacy." The teller stepped out, leaving Megan alone, or so she thought. Inside the manager's office, I leaned forward, my eyes glued to the monitor. This was it. The moment the rat took the cheese. Megan waited until the door clicked shut. Then she practically lunged at the box. She fumbled with the key, her breathing shallow and fast. She jammed it into the lock and twisted. The mechanism clicked. It was the sweetest sound she had heard in days. She pulled the long metal drawer out. Her eyes wide, expecting the glitter of diamonds, the heavy gold of the vintage jewelry she had coveted for a decade. She expected salvation. She expected millions. She set the box on the viewing table and threw open the lid. She froze. There were no diamonds. There were no rubies. There was no gold. The box was empty save for two small objects resting in the center of the cold metal floor. One was a single playing card, a tarot card. The Fool. It depicted a man walking blithely off a cliff, a small dog nipping at his heels, oblivious to his doom. The second object was a small black digital voice recorder identical to the one I had used to catch her poisoning my son. A sticky note was attached to it. "Play me." Megan stared at the items. Her hands started to shake, a violent tremor that rattled the box against the table. She looked around the room, suddenly realizing the walls were closing in. She picked up the card, crushed it in her fist, and threw it on the floor. Then, with a mixture of dread and morbid curiosity, she picked up the recorder and pressed the button. My voice filled the small steel room. It wasn't angry. It was conversational. "Hello, Megan. If you are listening to this, you have just made a very serious mistake. You broke into my home last night to steal this key. That is burglary. You violated the emergency restraining order the judge granted me yesterday. That is contempt of court, and you are currently standing in a bank vault trying to access assets that do not belong to you. That is attempted grand larceny." On the screen, I saw her face crumble. She dropped the recorder as if it were burning hot. "Look behind you, Megan," my voice continued from the device on the floor. "The cavalry is here." Megan spun around just as the heavy vault door swung open. This time it wasn't the polite bank teller. It was 3 uniformed officers and a detective from the burglary division. They didn't look happy. "Megan Bennett, put your hands on your head," the lead officer shouted, his voice echoing off the steel walls. She backed up against the wall of safety deposit boxes, trapped. She looked from the police to the empty box, then up at the security camera in the corner. She knew I was watching. She screamed. It wasn't words. It was just a sound of pure animal frustration. She had walked into the trap willingly, eagerly driven by her own greed. She didn't fight this time. The fight had gone out of her. She let them cuff her, her head hanging low, defeated. As they marched her out of the vault past the other customers in the lobby, who stopped to stare at the woman in the trench coat, being led away. In irons, she looked small. I left the manager's office through the back exit. I didn't need to see her get into the squad car. I knew where she was going. The arraignment hearing that afternoon was a bloodbath. The district attorney wasn't playing games anymore. The charges were stacking up like bricks in a wall burglary theft violation of a protective order fraud. And now, with the video evidence of her breaking into my home, they had her dead to rights. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, standing tall. "This defendant has shown a complete disregard for the law. She has broken into the victim's home, forged documents, and attempted to flee with stolen assets. She is a flight risk and a danger to the community. We request bail be set at $1 million. $1 million. Megan gasped. Her lawyer Silas looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. He tried to argue, mumbling something about excessive punishment, but the judge wasn't having it. "Bail is set at $1 million, the judge banged the gavel. Next case. Megan was led away, looking back at the gallery, searching for a friendly face. There were none. Her parents had stopped answering her calls days ago. Her friends had vanished the moment the police cars showed up. She was alone. Or almost alone. That evening, my investigator Miller handed me a transcript of a call Megan had made from the jail payphone. She hadn't called a bondsman. No bondsman would touch her without collateral, and she had none. She had called a number in a part of town where the streetlights didn't work and the police didn't go. She called a man named Vinnie Miller, said, his face grim. He is a loan shark, the kind who breaks kneecaps first and asks for payment later. I read the transcript. "Megan, I need $50,000 for the bond fee. I can pay you back double in a week. I just need to get out so I can access my husband's hidden accounts." "Vinnie, double. You got no car, lady. You got no house. What makes you think you got money, Megan?" "I have diamonds. My mother-in-law's diamonds. They are worth $500,000. I just need to get out to find them. I know where he moved them." She was still lying. She was still scheming. Even from a cage, she was digging herself deeper into hell. She was borrowing money from the devil to pay for a shovel, to dig for treasure that didn't exist. "Let the payment go through," Miller asked. I thought about it. If she got out, she would lead us to the doctor. She would lead us to the final piece of the puzzle. She was desperate, and desperate people make fatal mistakes. "Let her take the loan," I said. "If she owes Vinnie money, she has a deadline, and a deadline will make her sloppy." Megan Bennett was going to walk out of jail one more time. But this time, she wasn't just running from the law. She was running from a debt she could never pay toward a fate she had sealed with her own voice. She thought freedom was $1 million away. She didn't realize that freedom was just a longer leash, and I was the one holding the end of it. I did not just want to catch the man who helped kill my son. I wanted to evict him from his life. Dr. Vincent Thorne was a concierge doctor, the kind who catered to the bored, wealthy housewives of Bellevue, prescribing whatever they wanted, whether it was OxyContin Adderall, or in Megan's case, a slow-acting poison disguised as heart medication. He was also sleeping with her. I knew this because my investigator Miller had photos of them leaving a motel 3 hours after Jason's funeral. It was disgusting, but it was also the leverage I needed to bury them both. I sat in the conference room of the Medical Arts Building facing the board of directors of the private practice group. They looked nervous, and they should be. I had just bought the building and the controlling interest in their practice for $3 million cash. It was a lot of money, but imagining the look on Thorne's face made it a bargain. "Gentlemen," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, "you have a cancer in this practice, and I am the surgeon." I signaled the head of human resources. "Bring him in." Thorne walked in wearing a white coat that looked too bright a tan, that looked too fake, and a smile that died the moment he saw me. He didn't know who I really was to him. I was just Jason's grieving senile father. But he knew the men standing behind me, Miller and two uniformed officers. "Dr. Thorne," I said without standing up, "you are fired. You have 5 minutes to clear out your desk, and by the way, the locks have already been changed." "You can't do this," he stammered, his arrogance faltering. "I am a partner." "You were a partner," I corrected. "Now you are a liability. And before you call your lawyer, you might want to check your email. My associates just sent a rather large file to the State Medical Board. It contains the last 6 months of prescriptions you wrote for Jason Bennett. Prescriptions for a compound that doesn't exist in any medical textbook, but looks suspiciously like ethylene glycol when mixed by a compounding pharmacy you own shares in." He turned the color of old ash. He ran. He didn't argue. He didn't fight. He just turned and sprinted out of the room to his office, trying to salvage his life. But it was already over. By the time he reached his car, his phone was ringing. It was the medical board issuing an emergency suspension of his license. He was done. Now came the squeeze. A man like Thorne, stripped of his status, his income and his freedom, becomes a dangerous animal, and dangerous animals turn on their handlers. We tracked him to his penthouse apartment where he was frantically packing a bag. Miller had tapped his phone hours ago, and we listened from the van parked outside. Megan Pickup Thorne screamed into his phone. "Pick up, you stupid witch!" Megan answered on the 4th ring. She sounded breathless, likely holed up in some cheap motel, trying to avoid the loan shark, Vinny. "What do you want, Vincent?" "I told you not to call me." "They know," Megan Thorne shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "The old man knows. He bought the practice. He sent the files to the board. I lost my license. I am done." "Calm down. Vincent, don't say anything, just deny it. Deny it." "They have the records," Thorne roared. "Look, I need money. I need to get out of the country tonight. You owe me, Megan. I did this for you. I killed him for you." There it was, the confession. But I needed more. I needed the paper trail. I needed proof that she ordered it, not that he just did it for love. "I don't have any money, Vincent," Megan shrieked back. Harry froze everything. "I borrowed from a shark just to make bail." "Then find it," Thorne yelled. "Or I go to the police and I tell them everything. I tell them it was your idea. I tell them about the texts." "You wouldn't dare," Megan hissed. "You are in this as deep as I am." "Watch me," Thorne said, and slammed the phone down. I looked at Miller. "Go get him." We intercepted Thorne in the underground garage of his building as he was throwing a Louis Vuitton duffel bag into his Jaguar. When he saw Miller block the exit with our SUV, he reached for the glove compartment, probably for a gun, but he was a doctor, not a shooter. Miller was at his window before he could undo the latch, his own weapon drawn. "Don't do it," Doc Miller said calmly. "You are in enough trouble." Thorne froze. He looked at Miller, then at me, stepping out of the passenger side. He slumped against the steering wheel, sobbing. It was a pathetic sound. "Dr. Thorne," I said, opening his car door. "I am going to give you a choice. It is a very simple choice. Option A, you go to prison for first-degree murder, conspiracy, and medical malpractice. You will die in a cell, probably killed by someone who doesn't like doctors who poison innocent men. Option B, you become my best friend." He looked up, tears streaming down his face. What he whispered. "I don't care about you," I said coldly. "You are a tool, a weak, pathetic tool used by a woman who is smarter than you. I want her. You give me everything. The texts, the emails, the dates. You testify that she ordered the dosage increase. You give me the evidence that makes her the architect and you the bricklayer." "If I do that," he whispered. "If you do that, I said I will hire the best criminal defense attorney in the state to negotiate a plea deal for manslaughter. You will do time, Vincent. 10 years, maybe 15, but you won't get the needle, and you won't get life." He looked at me then at his phone sitting on the passenger seat. He picked it up. His hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped it. He unlocked it and opened a hidden folder. She texted me, he said, his voice hollow. 2 weeks ago, she said he was taking too long to die. She said to double it. He handed me the phone. I looked at the screen. There it was. A text message from Megan. He is still breathing. I can't wait anymore. The old man is sniffing around. Finish it. Double the dose in the refill. I don't care if it hurts. Just get it done. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the damp garage air. This was it. This was the smoking gun. She hadn't just poisoned him, she had tortured him. She had ordered his execution because I was getting too close. Jason died because he was protecting me. I pocketed the phone. Get in the van, Vincent. We have a district attorney to visit. As we drove to the prosecutor's office, Thorne sat in the back, broken and silent. He thought he had made a deal with the devil to save his skin. He didn't realize that by handing me that phone, he hadn't just saved himself from the death penalty, he had signed Megan's death warrant. She was hiding from a loan shark, thinking her biggest problem was money. She didn't know that the man she slept with, the man she conspired with, had just sold her out for a chance to breathe. The noose was tightening, and for the first time I held the rope. The ink on the arrest warrant was barely dry when the news broke. It wasn't just a local story anymore. The headline screamed from every television screen in the city, "Bellevue widow wanted for murder." The district attorney hadn't hesitated. With Dr. Thorne's confession and the digital trail of text messages demanding a double dose of poison, the charge wasn't manslaughter. It was murder in the first degree. It carried a mandatory life sentence, perhaps even the death penalty, given the calculated cruelty of the crime. Megan wasn't just a fraudster on the run from a loan shark anymore. She was the most wanted woman in the state. A red notice had been issued. Her face was on every digital billboard from Seattle to the Canadian border. I sat in the tactical command center the FBI had set up in a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Miller was there along with Special Agent Reynolds, a man who specialized in fugitive recovery. We were watching the digital map, waiting for a ping, a credit card usage, a license plate scan. But Megan had gone dark. She had ditched her phone. She was desperate, and desperate animals are the hardest to track because they stop following logic. Then Leo's phone rang. It was a burner number. Leo looked at me, his face pale. We were sitting in the corner of the room. I nodded. Agent Reynolds signaled the tech team to start the trace. Leo answered, putting it on speaker. Leo, Megan's voice crackled through the line. It sounded jagged, breathless, like she had been running for days. Leo, baby, you have to help me. They are lying about me. Your grandfather, he rigged everything. Leo didn't waver. He looked at the recording of his dying father playing on the loop in his mind. Where are you, Mom? Can't tell you, she sobbed. They are listening. I know they are listening. Leo, I need to leave. I have a way out, but I need cash. I need you to bring me the cash from your college fund. I know you have the access code. It was a lie. There was no cash in his college fund that he could withdraw instantly. She just wanted him. She wanted leverage. She knew she couldn't barter with me, and she couldn't barter with the police. But if she had Leo, if she had the grandson I was trying to save, she thought she could demand a plane, a pilot, and a suitcase full of money. I don't have the money, Mom. Leo said, his voice steady, following the script we had hastily written on a notepad. But Grandpa does. He keeps emergency cash in the safe at the marina office. He owns the shipyard now. The marina. It was perfect. Isolated. Industrial. Easy to surround, but full of shadows. It was a place where a transaction could happen, or an ambush. Bring it, Megan hissed. Just you. If I see a single cop, if I see that old man, I disappear, Leo. And you will never see your mother again. Do you understand? Meet me at Pier 4 in 1 hour. The line went dead. We had her location. But we also had a problem. She wouldn't show herself for a SWAT team. She would only show herself for her son. I can't let you do this, I told Leo, gripping his shoulder. It is too dangerous. She isn't your mother right now. She is a cornered killer. Leo looked at me. He put his hand over mine. It was the first time he had initiated contact since the funeral. Grandpa, she killed Dad. She tried to kill you. If she gets away now, she vanishes. I have to be the bait. It is the only way she comes out of the hole. I looked at Agent Reynolds. He nodded grimly. We will have snipers on the cranes. We will have a tactical team in the water. We will wire him. She won't get within 10 feet of him without us knowing. I didn't like it. Every instinct in my body screamed to lock Leo in a vault and keep him safe. But he was a Bennett. He had the steel. And he was right. This had to end tonight. An hour later, the fog had rolled in off the Puget Sound, blanketing the shipyard in a thick gray mist. The air smelled of salt diesel and rotting kelp. It was a graveyard of rusted shipping containers and idle cranes. I watched from the monitors inside the command van parked a half-mile away. Through the night vision camera concealed in Leo's jacket button, I saw what he saw. The wet wood of the pier, the dark water lapping against the pilings, the emptiness. Leo walked to the end of Pier 4. He held a black duffel bag. It was filled with cut paper, with real $100 bills only on the top layer. He stood under the single flickering halogen light, a lonely figure in the mist. "Mom," he called out. His voice echoed against the metal containers. "I'm here. I have the money." Nothing happened for a long minute. The wind whistled through the cables of the cranes. Then a shadow detached itself from behind a stack of crates. Megan stepped into the light. She looked like a wraith. Her designer clothes were torn and dirty. Her hair was matted. She had lost so much weight in the last week that her cheekbones looked like blades beneath her skin. Her eyes darted around frantically, checking the shadows, checking the water. "Show me," she commanded, her voice a raspy croak. Leo unzipped the bag. He held it open. Megan saw the cash. Her eyes widened, lighting up with that familiar greed, the only emotion she had ever truly felt. "Give it to me," she said, reaching out. Leo pulled the bag back. "No. You have to talk to me first. Why did you do it, Mom? Why did you kill him?" Megan's face twisted. "I didn't kill him. He was weak. He was going to lose everything because he wouldn't stand up to your grandfather. I did what I had to do to survive. I did it for us, Leo yelled, dropping the act. "You poisoned him. I saw the video, Mom. I saw him dying. You watched him choke and you smiled." Megan froze. The realization hit her. He knew. He wasn't a confused boy trying to help his mother. He was a trap. She looked at his jacket, at the button that was slightly too large. She looked at the dark shapes of the shipping containers surrounding them. "You little traitor," she whispered. She didn't run. She knew she couldn't outrun the police. She lunged. Before the sniper in my ear could shout the command, Megan had closed the distance. She didn't go for the bag. She went for Leo. She grabbed him by the collar of his jacket and spun him around, slamming his back against her chest. Her arm snaked around his neck in a chokehold. And then I saw the glint of metal. She had a gun. It was a small, cheap revolver, probably bought on the street, but at this range it didn't matter. She pressed the barrel into the soft flesh just behind Leo's ear. "Back off," she screamed into the darkness. "I know you are there. Back off, or I blow his brains out." In the command van, chaos erupted. "Subject has a hostage. Subject is armed. Do not engage. Do not engage." Reynolds was shouting into his headset. I didn't wait. I ripped the headset off. I opened the door of the van and sprinted into the night. I wasn't a young man. My knees ached. My heart hammered against my ribs. but I ran faster than I had in 40 years. I ran toward the pier. I ran toward my family. I reached the edge of the clearing. Megan was backing up toward the edge of the pier, dragging Leo with her. Leo was struggling, his eyes wide with terror, the gun digging into his skull. "I want a helicopter," Megan screamed. "I want a helicopter and a pilot, or I swear to God I will kill him. I gave him life, I can take it away." She was insane. The mask was gone. There was nothing human left in her eyes, only a cornered, vicious animal instinct. I stepped out from behind a container. I walked into the pool of halogen light. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't crouch. I stood tall, adjusting my coat, looking at her with the same disappointment I would show a contractor who had cut corners on a foundation. "Megan," I said, my voice booming over the sound of the wind. She flinched. She turned the gun slightly toward me, then jammed it back into Leo's head. "Stay back. Harry, stay back, or he dies." I took another step. I was 10 yards away. I could see the terror in Leo's eyes, but I also saw trust. He stopped struggling. He knew I was there. "You aren't going to shoot him, Megan," I said calmly, "because he is the only thing keeping the snipers from turning your head into a canoe." She looked up at the cranes, panic rising. "I want a way out," she shrieked. "There is no way out," I said, taking another step. "You built this cage yourself. You poisoned my son. You stole my money. And now you are holding a gun to your own child's head. Look at yourself. Is this the victory you wanted? Is this the lifestyle you killed for? I don't care. I just want to live." "Then drop the gun," I said. "Drop it and you live. You go to prison, but you live. You pull that trigger and you don't leave this pier." I took another step. 5 yards. "Don't come closer," she screamed, her finger whitening on the trigger. I stopped. I looked her dead in the eye. I didn't look at the gun. I looked at the soul that had withered away years ago. "You think you have leverage," I said softly. "You think holding him makes you powerful. But you forgot one thing, Megan. You forgot who raised him." I looked at Leo. I gave him the slightest nod. Leo didn't hesitate. He didn't try to pull away. He did exactly what I had taught him when he was 12 years old and being bullied at school. He went limp. He dropped his entire body weight, dead weight, straight down. Megan, expecting him to struggle, was caught off balance. Her arm slipped over his head. The gun wavered. In that split second, as Leo hit the deck and rolled, I didn't see a scared teenager. I saw my son's legacy. And then the darkness of the pier lit up with the red laser dots of a dozen rifles, all centering on Megan's chest. But she didn't drop the gun. She raised it, pointing it straight at me. The laser sights danced across the silk of her ruined blouse like angry fireflies. There were at least 6 of them, red dots trembling on her chest, her throat, her forehead. Megan froze, her arm still extended, the cheap revolver pointed directly at the center of my chest. In that moment, the fog seemed to lift just enough to reveal the silhouette of the tactical team moving in the shadows of the shipping containers, silent and lethal. The wind howled through the crane cables, a mournful sound that felt like a dirge for the life Megan had destroyed. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I looked at the gun, then I looked at her eyes. They were wide, manic, the pupils blown so large they swallowed the iris. She wasn't looking at the snipers. She was looking at me, and in her gaze there was no fear of death. There was only the burning, irrational hatred of a narcissist who has been denied her prize. "Do you see them, Megan?" I asked, my voice calm, cutting through the wind. "Look at your chest. You are lit up like a Christmas tree." She glanced down, seeing the red dots for the first time. Her breath hitched in a ragged sob, but she didn't lower the weapon. Her hand shook the barrel, wavering slightly, but her finger remained tight on the trigger. "I don't care," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I don't care if they kill me. I'm not going to prison. I'm not going to let you win. You think you're so smart, Harry. You think you're God. But you're just a stingy old man who wouldn't share." She took a step toward me, the gun steadying. I killed him because he was weak, she shrieked, the confession pouring out of her like bile. He was pathetic. I told him to ask you. I told him 1,000 times. Ask the old man for the money. Ask him for the trust fund. But he wouldn't do it. He said he wanted to make you proud. Proud. Can you believe that? He let us drown in debt. He let me suffer in a rental house just so he could have his daddy's respect. I felt a tear freeze on my cheek. My son hadn't been weak. He had been honorable. He had chosen struggle over handouts because I had taught him the value of earning his way. And this woman, this monster, had punished him for his integrity. He didn't suffer, Megan, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. You suffered because you couldn't buy a new Porsche every year. He was happy until you started poisoning his soup. He deserved it, she spat. If he wasn't going to give me the life I was promised, he was useless to me. He was just an obstacle. Just like you. You have millions sitting in accounts buildings all over the city, and you let us live like peasants. You owe me this, Harry. You owe me for the years I wasted on your loser son. The entitlement was breathtaking. Even with a dozen sniper rifles trained on her heart, she still believed she was the victim. She truly believed that my money was her birthright, and that murder was a justifiable reaction to being denied access to it. You have 5 seconds, Megan, I said, my voice turning to steel. The FBI is listening. They have your confession. They have the weapon. Surrender now, drop the gun, and you live. You go to a cell, but you breathe. I don't want a cell, she yelled, raising the gun higher, squinting down the sights. I want it all. I saw her knuckle whiten. She was going to do it. She was going to pull the trigger, not to escape, but just to take one last thing from me. She wanted to die, but she wanted to take me with her. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the muzzle flash in my mind before it happened. I braced myself for the impact, but the shot never came. From the ground, a blur of motion erupted. Leo. He hadn't just rolled away to save himself. He had rolled into position. While Megan was screaming at me, distracted by her own rage, Leo had coiled himself like a spring at her feet. He didn't look like the scared boy who had walked onto the pier. He moved with a desperate, violent fluidity. He lunged upward, not toward her body, but toward the gun. I had taught him self-defense when he was 12 after he got beaten up for his lunch money. I taught him that you don't fight strength with strength. You fight the weakness, the wrist, the thumb, the leverage. Leo's hand clamped over the cylinder of the revolver, his other hand striking her wrist with a bone-crushing force. It was a textbook disarm maneuver executed with the adrenaline of a son avenging his father. Megan screamed, not in anger this time, but in shock. The gun didn't fire. Leo's grip on the cylinder prevented the hammer from falling. He twisted her arm back hard, forcing her body to follow the torque. "Drop it!" he roared. Megan tried to claw at his face with her free hand, but Leo swept her legs out from under her. She hit the wet wood of the pier with a heavy thud that shook the water below. The gun skittered across the planks, sliding toward the edge, and splashed into the dark Puget Sound. Leo didn't let go. He pinned her to the deck, his knee in the center of her back, holding her down just as the bodyguards had done the day before. But this was different. This was personal. He looked down at the woman who had given him birth, the woman who had poisoned his father, and I saw a struggle in his eyes. The struggle between the boy who loved his mother and the man who knew what justice required. "Don't move," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Don't you dare move." "Get off me, you ungrateful brat," Megan hissed, spitting onto the deck. "I am your mother." "You aren't my mother," Leo said, his voice breaking. "You are just the woman who killed my dad." Before she could respond, the shadows around us exploded with light. The tactical team moved in. "FBI, don't move, hands behind your back." Heavy boots thundered across the pier. 4 agents swarmed Megan, pulling Leo off her gently but firmly. They hauled Megan to her feet, not with the politeness of the local police, but with the rough efficiency of federal agents dealing with a cop killer. They slammed her against a shipping container, cuffing her hands so tight I could see her skin pinch. She fought them. She kicked and screamed, a wild animal caught in a trap. She cursed me. She cursed Leo. She cursed Jason. "You think this is over, Harry?" she screamed as they dragged her toward the waiting vans. "I will get a jury. I will tell them you abused me. I will tell them you set me up. You will never see a dime of that money." I walked over to her. The agents paused, letting me have my moment. I stood inches from her face. She smelled of sweat and madness. "Megan," I said softly, so only she could hear. "You aren't going to get a jury to believe you. Because tomorrow morning the entire world is going to see the video of you holding a gun to your own son's head. You aren't a victim. You are the Black Widow of Bellevue, and you just became the most hated woman in America." Her eyes widened. She hadn't thought about the cameras. She hadn't thought about the optics. She realized finally that she had lost the one thing she valued more than money: her image. "Get her out of here," I said to the agent in charge. They dragged her away, her heels scraping uselessly against the wood. The media helicopters were already circling overhead, their spotlights cutting through the fog, illuminating the scene. I knew that by morning, that image of her disheveled manic and in cuffs would be on every news feed in the country. I turned to Leo. He was standing by the edge of the pier, looking down at the water, where the gun had vanished. He was shivering, the adrenaline crash setting in. I walked over and put my arm around him. He didn't pull away. He leaned into me, burying his face in my shoulder, and for the first time since Jason died, he let go. He cried not like a child, but like a man who has survived a war. "It is over, Leo," I whispered, holding him tight. "It is finally over." We stood there in the cold mist, the lights of the police cars flashing blue and red against the industrial gray of the shipyard. We were the last two Bennetts standing. We were battered. We were scarred. But we were alive. And as I looked at the flashing lights receding into the distance, taking the poison out of our lives, I knew that we would be okay. We had to be. We had a legacy to rebuild. The air conditioning in the King County Superior Court was set to Arctic, but Megan was sweating. I could see a single bead of perspiration tracking through the heavy layer of foundation she had applied to make herself look pale and sickly. This was the main event. The trial of the century, the papers called it. The Black Widow of Bellevue versus the billionaire builder. The courtroom was packed shoulder to shoulder. There were sketch artists, true crime bloggers live tweeting from the back row, and half the socialites of Seattle who had once sipped wine with Megan and were now eager to see her hang. Megan sat at the defense table dressed in a beige cardigan and a long skirt, looking for all the world like a librarian who had been wrongly accused of a parking violation. She had ditched her high-powered shark of a lawyer for a public defender with a kind face and a soft voice, a calculated move to make her look like the underdog fighting the massive legal machine I had assembled. Her defense was simple and repulsive. She claimed Jason was depressed. She claimed he was suicidal because of my overbearing control. She claimed the antifreeze was self-administered, a tragic cry for help that went wrong, and that she was just a grieving wife being framed by a vindictive father-in-law who hated her. It was a good story. It played to the jury's sympathies. Until I took the stand. Mr. Bennett, the prosecutor. A man named Stone, who lived up to his name, said gently, "Can you tell the jury about your relationship with your son?" I sat in the witness box, my hands folded on the wood. I didn't look at the jury. I looked at Megan. I wanted her to feel the weight of my gaze. I wanted her to know that this wasn't a legal proceeding. It was an exorcism. Jason wasn't my blood. I said, my voice filling the silent room without the need for a microphone. I adopted him when he was 2 years old. He had been abandoned in a shelter, malnourished and afraid of his own shadow. The first night I brought him home, he wouldn't sleep in the bed. He slept on the floor by the door because he was afraid I would leave him. I paused, letting the image sink in. I spent 40 years proving to him that I would never leave. I built my empire not for me, but for him. I was hard on him, yes. I wanted him to be strong because I knew the world was cruel, but I never wanted him to be miserable. And he wasn't. Not until he met her. I pointed a finger at Megan. She shrank back in her chair, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. "Objection," the public defender said half-heartedly. "Overruled," the judge said, leaning forward. "She claims he was suicidal," I continued, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. Jason was not suicidal. He was terrified. He was a man living in a house with a predator trying to shield his son from her teeth. He stayed in that marriage not because he was weak, but because he was brave. He took the poison she fed him because he was afraid that if he left, she would turn her attention to Leo. Liar, Megan whispered from her table loud enough for the front row to hear. He was a coward. The judge banged the gavel, but I didn't stop. You want proof of his state of mind? I asked the room. You want to know what my son was thinking while his wife was mixing ethylene glycol into his chicken soup? I looked at Stone. He nodded and walked to the evidence table. He picked up a small black notebook. It wasn't the ledger of financial crimes Leo had found earlier. This was different. This was the book Leo had found wedged under the floorboards beneath Jason's side of the bed, wrapped in plastic. It was a diary. Exhibit G, Stone announced. The personal journal of Jason Bennett recovered by his son Leo Bennett. The courtroom went dead silent. Even the typing from the reporters stopped. Read the entry from October 12th, I said. Stone opened the book. He adjusted his glasses. He began to read, his voice projecting clearly. October 12th. The burning is back. It starts in my stomach and moves to my throat. It feels like I swallowed glass. Megan made dinner tonight. She insisted I eat it all. She sat there and watched me. She smiled the whole time. I know there is something in it. I know she is doing this. But if I say anything, she says I am crazy. She says she will take Leo and move to France and I will never see him again. I can't lose Leo. I will eat the soup. I will take the pain. As long as I am alive, I can protect him. I just have to hold on. A sound rippled through the courtroom. It was the sound of a collective intake of breath. A woman in the jury box covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. Read November 3rd, I commanded. Stone turned the page. November 3rd. I fell down the stairs today. My legs just gave out. My vision is blurry. I can't drive anymore. Megan told the neighbors I was drinking. She told Leo I was sick in the head. I tried to call Dad today, but she took my phone. She locked me in the bedroom. She said I need to rest. She brought me a glass of medicine. It smells like the garage. I poured it in the plant when she wasn't looking. The plant died this morning. I am dying. I know it. I just hope Dad figures it out before she gets to Leo. I closed my eyes. Hearing those words read aloud was like being flayed alive. My son had been fighting a war in his own bedroom alone, sick and terrified, and I hadn't been there to save him. I hadn't seen it until it was too late. But I was here now. I opened my eyes and looked at Megan. The act was dropping. The grieving widow mask was slipping, revealing the ugliness underneath. She was shaking her head, her face red, her lips pulling back in a snarl. "That is fake," she shouted, standing up. "He never wrote that. You wrote that, you old fraud." The judge banged the gavel violently. "Sit down, defendant." She didn't sit down. The reading of the diary had stripped her naked in front of the world. It destroyed her narrative of the depressed husband. It showed her for what she was, a monster who tortured a man to death while he tried to protect their child. "He deserved it," she screamed, her voice cracking. filling the vaulted ceiling of the courtroom. He was useless. He wouldn't give me the money I needed. The money I have debts. He was just sitting on it, letting me rot in that suburb's hellhole. The courtroom gasped. It was the moment every prosecutor dreams of. An open court confession driven by pure narcissistic rage. "You think you are better than me?" she shrieked, pointing at the jury, at me, at everyone. "You all want the same things. You want the cars, the clothes, the life I just had the guts to take it. He was a weakling. He was better off dead." Her lawyer tried to grab her arm to pull her down, but she shoved him away. "And you," she screamed at me, her eyes bulging. "You are the worst of them all. You sat on millions while we scraped by. You killed him just as much as I did. If you had just given us the money, he would still be alive." "It is your fault." The bailiffs moved in. They grabbed her arms, forcing her back into her chair. She fought them, spitting and cursing, a rabid animal finally cornered. I didn't shout back. I didn't stand up. I just leaned into the microphone. "My son was worth 10 of you, Megan," I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. "He had something you will never have. He had a soul. And that money you wanted so badly, the money you killed for, it is going to be the reason you spend the rest of your life in a cage. Because I am going to use every penny of it to make sure you never see the sun again." The jury wasn't looking at me anymore. They were looking at her. And in their eyes, I didn't see doubt. I didn't see pity. I saw revulsion. I saw the verdict written on their faces long before they would ever retreat to the deliberation room. I stepped down from the witness stand. I walked past the defense table. Megan was panting, held down by 2 deputies, her hair wild, her face twisted in hate. "Goodbye, Megan," I whispered. I walked back to my seat beside Leo. He was crying silent tears, hours running down his face, but he wasn't looking away. He was watching her. He was watching the monster be revealed. He reached out and took my hand, gripping it hard. "We did it, Grandpa," he whispered. "Not yet," I said, watching the bailiffs drag a screaming Megan out of the courtroom as the judge called for a recess. "But we are close." The trial was effectively over. She had confessed. She had justified it. She had shown the world the darkness that lived inside her. Now all that was left was the paperwork. All that was left was the sentence. And I knew with a grim certainty that justice was about to be served cold. The judge's voice was a hammer striking down the last remnants of Megan's delusion. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder of Jason Bennett. 30 years consecutive for wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. It wasn't just a sentence. It was an erasure. She was being removed from the world, deleted from the future she had tried so hard to steal. I watched from the front row as the reality finally pierced her armor. She didn't scream this time. She didn't rage. She just slumped. It was as if her skeleton had been removed. The bailiffs hauled her up her legs, dragging her eyes wide and vacant, staring at a future of gray walls and steel bars. She looked at me one last time before they pushed her through the side door. It wasn't a look of hate. It was a look of confusion. She still couldn't understand how she, the smart one, the ambitious one, had lost to an old man she thought was senile. Leo squeezed my hand. "It is over, Grandpa," he whispered. "Yes," I said. "It is over." But for me it wasn't quite done. There was one last thing I had to do. I didn't need to, but I wanted to. I needed to see the monster in its cage to make sure the lock was truly turned. 3 months later, I drove to the state penitentiary. It was a concrete scar on the landscape surrounded by razor wire and miles of empty fields. I checked in at the visitor center, enduring the metal detectors and the pat-downs. I was just another visitor here, not a billionaire, not a victim, just a man coming to see a ghost. When they brought her into the visiting room, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman who sat on the other side of the thick plexiglass wasn't the Megan who had worn silk pajamas and driven a Porsche. That woman was dead. This woman looked 20 years older. Her hair, once dyed a perfect blonde, was growing out in streaks of dull gray and brown. Her skin was sallow, pockmarked, and devoid of the expensive creams she used to hoard. She wore a shapeless orange jumpsuit that hung off her gaunt frame. Her hands, once manicured, were rough, the nails bitten down to the quick. She sat down and picked up the phone. I picked up mine. "Harry," she breathed. Her voice was raspy, desperate. "You came. I knew you would come." She leaned forward, her eyes darting around nervously. "You have to get me out of here, Harry. You have money. You know people. Get me a better lawyer. We can appeal. I can say I was coerced. I can say Thorne forced me. Please, Harry. I can't stay here. These women. They are animals." I listened to her beg. I listened to the same voice that had ordered poison for my son, the same voice that had threatened my grandson on a dark pier. She hadn't changed. She hadn't found remorse in her cell. She had only found fear. She still thought she could manipulate me. She still thought she was the protagonist of the story, just temporarily inconvenienced. "I am family." "Harry," she pleaded, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "I am Leo's mother. You can't let Leo's mother rot in here." Think of him. I was thinking of him. I was thinking of how he was finally sleeping through the night. I was thinking of how he was smiling again, slowly, cautiously. I was thinking of how he had started law school, driven by a burning desire to put people like her away. I didn't speak. I didn't have any words left for her. I had said everything I needed to say in court. I had said everything I needed to say when I signed the arrest warrant. "Harry, say something," she screamed, slamming her hand against the glass. "Don't just look at me. I am a human being. I made a mistake, one mistake, a mistake." That is what she called 6 months of poisoning. A mistake. I looked at her hands. I remembered how they looked holding the gun to Leo's head. I remembered how they looked signing the forged checks. I slowly raised my hand and placed my palm against the cold glass. Megan stopped screaming. She looked at my hand. She put her own hand up, matching it against the glass, thinking this was a moment of connection, a moment of forgiveness. "Harry," she whispered, hope lighting up her eyes. I looked her dead in the face. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at her with absolute final indifference. I took a breath and I let it go. I let go of the anger. I let go of the hate. I let go of the need for revenge. It was all done. She was nothing to me now. She was just a number in a system I paid taxes to support. I pulled my hand away. I stood up. I hung the phone back on the receiver. "No," she shrieked, realizing what was happening. "No, Harry, don't walk away. You can't leave me here. I will die in here." "Harry," I turned my back. I walked toward the heavy steel door. I could hear her screaming my name, muffled by the glass, a desperate drowning sound. I didn't look back. I walked out of the room, out of the prison, and into the bright, clean air of the afternoon. Inside the prison, the guards dragged a sobbing Megan back to her cell block. She wasn't in protective custody anymore. She was in general population. She stumbled into the common room, wiping her eyes, her arrogance flaring up one last time as a defense mechanism. "What are you looking at?" She snapped at a group of women playing cards at a metal table. "Do you know who I am? I was rich. I had a mansion." One of the women stood up. She was large, with a scar running down her cheek, and eyes that had seen things Megan couldn't even imagine in her nightmares. She didn't care about mansions. She didn't care about Porsches. She cared about respect. And Megan, with her entitlement and her whining, had just disrespected the entire block. "We know who you are," the woman said, stepping closer. "You are the Black Widow. You poisoned your own man." Megan sneered, trying to summon the ghost of her former power. "He was weak, just like you." It was the last mistake she would make for a long time. The woman didn't talk. She moved. Megan didn't see the fist coming. She just felt the explosion of pain as her nose shattered. She fell to the concrete floor, curling into a ball, screaming for help that wasn't coming. The guards were slow to react. Maybe they didn't hear. Maybe they just took a moment to tie their shoes. As the blows rained down on her, stripping away the last of her vanity, the last of her delusion, Megan finally understood. The money was gone. The status was gone. The power was gone. She was at the bottom of the food chain, and she was going to stay there until she took her last breath. I drove home with the windows down. The radio was playing a song Jason used to like. I turned it up. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. I thought about the empty house waiting for me. It wouldn't be empty for long. I had plans. Big plans. Justice had been served. It hadn't brought Jason back, but it had balanced the scales. And as I merged onto the highway, leaving the prison in my rearview mirror, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt peace. The building standing on the lot where my son once lived didn't look like a house anymore. It didn't look like a crime scene either. It looked like a fortress of glass and steel bathed in the warm light of a Seattle summer afternoon. We had leveled the suburban colonial that Megan had killed for. We had crushed the walls that held Jason's silent screams and poured a new foundation, one built not on secrets, but on safety. Above the wide double doors, polished silver letters caught the sun, the Jason Bennett Sanctuary. I stood in the crowd watching my grandson. It had been exactly 1 year since the funeral. 1 year since I stood in the rain, broken and alone, while my daughter-in-law whispered threats in my ear. Today the sky was a brilliant, piercing blue, and I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by doctors, social workers, city council members, and survivors, men who had walked through hell in their own homes and survived to tell the tale. Leo stood at the podium. He wasn't the shivering boy on the pier anymore. He filled out his suit with the shoulders of a man who has carried a heavy load and learned how to balance it. He was 19, but his eyes held the wisdom of a veteran. He was finishing his first year of pre-law at the top of his class. He didn't want to be a corporate shark like Arthur Henderson. He wanted to be a prosecutor. He wanted to be the person standing between the monsters and the weak. My father didn't have a voice, Leo said into the microphone, his voice steady and clear, echoing across the plaza. He was taught that men don't complain. He was taught that men endure. He stayed in a dangerous place because he was trying to protect me. This building is for him. It is for every man who is told that being a victim makes him weak. It is a promise that you will be heard. You will be believed, and you will be safe. The applause was thunderous. I felt a lump in my throat, but I didn't cry. I was done crying. I felt pride. It was a fierce, burning pride that warmed the cold places in my heart that Jason's death had left behind. Megan had tried to erase my son. She had tried to turn him into a footnote in her story of greed. Instead, she had turned him into a martyr, a symbol and a savior. She was rotting in a cell, forgotten and despised, while Jason's name was carved in stone, a beacon for the entire city. Leo stepped down and took the giant ceremonial scissors. He looked at me. I walked up to join him. We didn't need to speak. We gripped the handles together. With a sharp snap, the red ribbon fell away. The doors opened. The legacy was alive. Later, after the cameras had gone and the crowd had dispersed, Leo and I walked down to the edge of the property, where the land met the water of the Sound. It was quiet here. The wind rustled the tall grass. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an old, cracked smartphone. It was Jason's phone, the one Megan had used to order his death, the one that held the texts that had condemned her. It had been evidence. Now it was just a piece of plastic and glass, a relic of a nightmare we had woken up from. I looked at it one last time. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hate. Those emotions were too heavy to carry into the future. I just felt a quiet, somber finality. I drew my arm back and threw it. The phone arced high into the air, catching the sunlight for a brief second before it splashed into the dark, deep water. It sank instantly, taking the last of the poison with it. Leo watched the ripples fade. He adjusted his tie, looking out at the horizon where the Olympic mountains rose against the sky. "Do you think he knows?" Leo asked softly. "Do you think he knows what we did?" I looked at my grandson. I saw Jason's kindness in his face, but I saw my strength. I saw the Bennett steel tempered by fire. "He knows," I said. "He knows that you are safe, and he knows that the woman who hurt him can never hurt anyone else again." Leo nodded. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the clean, salt air. "I wish I could have saved him, Grandpa. I wish I had found the diary sooner. I wish I had been stronger back then." I put my hand on his shoulder, squeezing tight. I turned him so he was looking at me, not the past. We cannot change the past, Leo. We cannot bring him back, no matter how much money we spend or how many buildings we name after him. I looked back at the sanctuary glowing in the sunset, full of hope and second chances. "But we can build a future your dad would be proud of. And looking at you, son, I think we already have." We stood there for a moment longer, two men bound by blood and battle, watching the sun dip below the edge of the world. Then we turned our backs on the water and walked toward the car. We had work to do. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I learned that justice is the only meal that truly satisfies the soul. For years I hid my success to teach my son humility, only to watch greed destroy him from the outside in. My biggest lesson wasn't about money or power. It was about the true definition of family. Blood doesn't make you family, loyalty does. Respect does. Megan mistook my silence for surrender and my kindness for frailty. She learned too late that the most dangerous man in the room is the one who has nothing left to lose but the truth. We cannot save everyone we love, but we can honor them by refusing to let their light be extinguished by darkness. If you believe justice was finally served for Jason, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of truth and retribution. Let me know in the comments. Would you have given Megan a second chance?